top of conventions is even more dominated. So just as a show of hands for me and for everybody, really. Let's just do a show of hands. Vote for one, okay? Vote for, if you are a fan, or consider yourself a fan, even an armchair fan. Nobody wore uniforms tonight. That's supposed to be on. That's only like about 10%. Oh, yes, you do. You have the badge. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool. No, I'm talking about you walked in and you're arguing with somebody because their cuff is 1/8 of an inch braid is off too far on their. Talking about that part. Okay. So just show of hands. If you're a fan, who came in? What made you a fan? If you came in with the original series, watching it NBC prime time in the 60s. Okay, great. Well, this is all downhill then. Okay, if you came in with the animateds or with, if you're a rerun baby, basically, with the movies, which is me. So you've already, okay. Well, this is going to be pointless now. Anyone come in with Next Generation? Okay, okay, yes. No, that's fine, yeah. Anyone come in with Deep Space Nine? Okay. Oh, I should be, like, just so in case you don't know these things, I could have done this. Deep Space Nine. Okay, awesome. Voyager.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It's what made you a fan. You weren't a fan before. That's what I'm looking for. Voyager. Enterprise. Enterprise brought you. And even the Kelvin timeline movies. Now we're supposed to say. Okay. Okay. No, I mean that's what made you a fan. That you weren't a fan before. Okay. Or did anybody come in with Futurama? Okay. Okay. No, I just like to check on that. So just a little bit about me. If you don't know my background, why I'm standing up here, why the library had me come in. I was a fan as a kid and have a background in theater and journalism both, and worked in news for 10, 12 years, and was lucky enough to get into the real world Star Trek world in an ancillary way, in a lot of ways. For 8 years, I was the managing editor of the official Communicator magazine, which is the late, great, departed one. Oh, thank you. I was going to say, if we had any readers tonight. It was the last issue, by the way. Kind of my best baby, or the thing that got me on the national attention first, was doing the Next Generation companion. And Rob has the red edition out there in the display case. This was the final edition. The first one was blue, and I'm very sentimental about it. But as they added more shows and we kept updating it, that went through that. And this is what I've got a couple of copies with me tonight. It's just a couple of years old. It's an official book called Stellar Cartography, which is actually 10 maps that fold up to about this big, and then a guidebook that goes with them in a very nice heavy case. And they're maps from different time periods and different alien cultures. And there's one right there that I think is destined for some gold ink a little bit later. And then I was very lucky to have got to play my favorite character of all the series, especially the originals, McCoy, in the first two editions of Star Trek Continues. So anybody watch any of the fan films of any of the kind? They're all free online. They're on YouTube or their websites. Yeah. That's been an amazing fan trend the last few years.
Didn't the actor who played Apollo, wasn't he on that?
Yeah, Mike Forrest played Apollo in our first episode, but Apollo as an aged man. Yeah, no, that was one of the cool things about that. But before that, I should have done this sooner, but I was lucky enough to be in the final scene with a bunch of guest extras on the finale of Enterprise, which was had been saying for 12 years the last TV series going, but now we have a new series coming we'll talk about in a second. But even that acting bit, my journalism and my fandom side has been, I've always been interested in the background. The background as a TV production, how it went together, and then the great, what we call now the canon, or the continuity of Star Trek. And very maddening to be a kid growing up with 79 hours of Star Trek, and not all the gaps are filled in, and became a very big early gap filler, I call this. And so even here, the years have gone by when I was working on the magazine and writing books, being able to talk to a lot of the behind-the-scenes people and record that at the time, and now I guess preserving that has been a real big calling of mine. So that's why I love talking to fans and talking in groups like this and at conventions. But this is Ron B. Moore, who was one of the 2 or 3 visual effects supervisors from, actually he was with the whole 18 years. He came in with the pilot on Next Generation. And David Takamura was a young kid, was an intern toward the end of Next Generation and worked on the series back and forth. And this is actually Mike Demerit, who was a second assistant director and rose up to be a first AD as the years went by. But there you go, green screen and that same set that you saw on TV. I just kind of like those. But again, over the years, got Aaron Eisenberg playing Nog on the baseball show of DS9, Take Me Out the Holosuite, which was amazing because they spent 5 days filming on location at the baseball field for Marymount College in LA, and having that much of the cast all together at one time for that long was kind of amazing. So I wound up with years and years of all these cassette tapes, and realized about 10 years ago these 400 or 500 hours should be preserved. Some of them are like 1 hour, 2 hour long sit-downs with not so much the actors, but again the producers, the writers, the designers, the crew people, the people who really made the shows. The actors are pretty and they tell great stories, and they're the ones that get interviewed all the time. But if you want to know the show, you need to know the behind-the-scenes people, and that's kind of where I've been working a lot, as I say, working in Trekland. So I have some at the table. End of first mini commercial. If you want to come over, I'll tell you about some of the remastered digital things we've done with a theme. And this year I did one for the anniversary. From the 2 shows that were done in 1996 for the 30th anniversary, one of which was the Trials and Tribulations show, which kind of Forrest Gumped Star Trek with the DS9 people with Kirk and Spock, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, so I started off being an editor and an author, and the last 10 years the world has changed and there aren't big things to be part of, so they said, go out and entrepreneur, young man. And that's kind of what I've done. So very sad when Leonard Nimoy passed away last year, and my phone rings and Sky News in England at midnight wanted me to talk on camera at the end of the day about Leonard Nimoy for 5 or 10 minutes. So those kinds of things have been exciting. Again, I do so many little, I say odd jobs, maybe master of none, but I just started saying I just call everything I do Trekland. And this is some of my projects now. So my CDs, my documentary, which I can talk to you about later on. This is a nonprofit that came to me to be a spokesman for them, which is very exciting, to get people excited about getting into the future by getting kids from kindergarten through post-grad, students anyway, around the world involved and awarding 100+ slots for projects on an orbiter that's been designed, but it's named the Enterprise, and it's a National Space Society project that's nonprofit, and very exciting. And then Portal 47 is kind of my new business enterprise I finally put together when people said, all that kind of interesting oddball stuff you know and you have and the people you know that worked on the shows, you should do something with that. So come over and I can talk to you about that at the end of the time. It's like a mini con all year long, we say. We go deep diving every month. So anyway, ooh, gotta watch that. It is the 50th, in case you didn't realize, which if you don't want to do the math too closely, maybe you don't want to think about it. Did anybody see Man Trap when it aired on September 8th? The very first time Star Trek was on TV, did anybody see it that night? You were half awake or what?
Well, I'm not sure because it's like I was
oh, in the crib?
well, I would have been about 5.5 years old at the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, my wife, I don't let her forget this. She's about 3 years older than I am, and she was a little girl who was sneaking up, staying up late to watch. She had a little black and white portable in her room, and her mom wouldn't let her stay up late, so she was in bed with it on, quiet, with an earplug run into her, like watching from the curtain. Because she had to see about this thing about Spock's wife. My God, what is that about? So anyway, you guys that saw the original run of NBC, I bow down to you because I'm just a rerun baby. But I saw someone the other day, it was so cool, some young person on Twitter, I think, said, they were talking about the new show Discovery, and she says, it's because it's been 12 years since even Enterprise was on, and a lot of people didn't watch Enterprise. And she said, it's so exciting to be able to watch a new Star Trek come on fresh. And I realize we've had a whole generation of fans that have come along, even though I feel like we've been in the desert here wandering for 12 years. There's a whole generation that are still out there and new who have never had the experience of watching a show week to week, even if it's a show you hate. No, I'm kidding. So we're in a library series, and I realized this too, that while we're in a library series this week, that we should remember that Star Trek has always been very good about supporting the arts and supporting science and supporting culture. And every year the American Library Association has these, they do this with all, not just Star Trek, but they get pop culture, you know, heroes, celebrities together in groupings, and they do those pictures where they pose people. And you know what? That really could go away. Surely that can go away. Thank you. They do those photo shoots where they tell people to bring in their favorite book. And they've done this with all the Star Trek cast. So here's the original guys during the movie years. And here's the Voyager cast with their bringing their favorite books in. It's very, you know, very cool that that Star Trek has had that kind of impact. And you think about all the Star Trek books and even comic books, there have been a few hundred, and a lot of them have been bestsellers. They've come back around. And if you're going to talk about libraries honoring Star Trek, then let's go back even to, that's from the 70s, just from the printing, being honored at the time. Even Beyond Earth, I guess you'd have to say that Star Trek's had a publishing impact there. That's Mark Okrand, who developed the Klingon language when they decided, somebody got the bright idea to publish the Klingon dictionary, and it was a huge bestseller, and spawned a whole scholarly movement. I mean, Klingon is now the most spoken fake language, way past Esperanto and way past anything else that people have come up with. And no, I don't speak. I can say Qapla', and that's about it, which is success or greeting or whatever. But there is an academic community that studies Klingon. In fact, there's a whole academic interest now whenever they create a language for science fiction. I did this just last night. The Blue People that James Cameron did with the virtual reality movie. Avatar, yeah, Na'vi. That was a created language. And you can go online now and find an association of made-up language creators, and they're probably on the verge of having an academic journal, because they're not just making up a language. They also, like it was so easy for Mark to do, you know, imbue that with the culture and the personality, because that's what all language is. It all, you know, German is German, and English is English, and it's, you know, the mongrel of languages, and French is French, and whatever. So the artificial language creators now, it's almost like they have a union or something, and they're really good at that. And Hollywood and fictitious, and some writers search them out to do that. But again, Star Trek kind of pioneered that a little bit. But speaking of pioneering, here's Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek from the 60s, 1966. And I tell you what I'm doing tonight is kind of hitting some high points and hitting some dots and maybe connecting some things, because it's the 50th anniversary. And I didn't know where you all are coming from. I see you're all original series people, so that told me something. But rather than like getting into details and hashing all that out, for my part here, I just want to try to go down some roads and maybe get you thinking about some angles of Star Trek and culture, pop culture, that we haven't thought about maybe. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end. In fact, I have a surprise for some lucky person here in the room. And then we can do Q's and A's, and if somebody wants to get off on some specific tangents, we can do that more than what I did here, okay? But I love this picture because this is 1986. So we're all full of the 50th anniversary party this year, right? 86 was the first time, it was the 20th anniversary, and it was the first time that the studio finally, as you guys know, as this crowd knows, the first 10 years it was like, I don't say the ugly stepchild, but it was the thing that don't get no respect, as Rodney Dangerfield would have said, for at least 5 or 6 years. And then it was everyone running around trying to figure out how to make money off of it and bring it back from the animated series on. And then when Star Wars hit, it was like, oh my God, we've got a thing. We need to get it out there and get that out there. And then we had the motion picture finally. And then The Wrath of Khan, which really kind of settled the Star Trek movie world in. But in 86, they'd run through 3 successful movies, and Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, the Whales movie, had just come out, was the biggest Star Trek movie around the world because it translated so easily. I don't just mean language-wise, but culturally, and you know, it was about saving the whales, which was a global issue. And the humor was pretty universal in it. The Russians loved the Soviet Union era when they did a screening in Moscow, when it got to the line at the very end when they're talking about a new ship, and one of either McCoy or someone says, well, the bureaucratic mentality is the one constant in the universe, they said the Moscow audience just died laughing. It was the funniest line in the, with all the old communist bureaucracy. But 1986, the studio threw this huge party, had the whole cast, they had this goofy Star Trek cake, they cut cake, Star Trek IV was just a huge world hit. The local stations for 20 years almost, 20-something years, had been talking about wanting more episodes. Please make more Star Treks. We can make more money if you make more Star Trek. And 1986 was, on top of all that, was the year that they finally got their plan together and announced The Next Generation. And so we've come from that to the studio, the last few movies. Anybody gone to see the reboot movies, the J.J. Abrams? Okay. First two, not this one. We can talk about this a little later because I know with some circles we can talk. That will get the discussion going right there. But anyway, the studio partnering up here and making sense of what they've got again. But being one who loves academic research and serious study, I came across this chart, obviously done after some serious research, as to why. Is it just because of the JJ movies, or is there something else going on that Star Trek is cool again, is popular again, back in the mainstream? So this is celebrities coming out as the responses here from research. Celebs coming out as Trekkies, 5%. Obama loves it, 15%. Wired magazine says Star Trek is cooler than Star Wars, 3%. Quinto and Pines on Saturday Night Live, 8%. It was actually good the whole time, 50%. Yeah, I'm kidding. This is actually from The Onion, so not serious academics. But it makes a lot of sense. But something maybe hopefully makes about as much sense is, all the years have gone by, I mean, since day one, of Star Trek being something different than just this little show that should have died away because the ratings weren't there, which was a lie and wrong. Especially the kind of ratings that as soon as Star Trek was killed, they instantly realized that demographics were a better measure of popularity on TV than just raw numbers. And there is a story that the research department at NBC guy came running in. They had just been looking at demographics. Oh, we want that 18 to 35 college-educated young consumer, and we want men 18 to 40, all those things. And they came running into the program department and say, hey, we've got the perfect show, you guys. You have the perfect show for exactly who we want to reach. And they said, great, who is it? And they said, Star Trek. And they were like, oh, we just canceled it. Okay. So ever since that time, though, and since it refused to go away, Star Trek lives. And the movies, and all the series, and we've gone through 5, now about to be 6 series, the movies, different iterations, 50 years, not dying, and in the last 12 years especially, still more and more people. That age-old question is like, why Star Trek, why is it popular? And everybody has their answers. But I always think like the one-off questions and the answers don't add up. I mean, we have classic television, we have classic science fiction, we have thought-provoking literature. I mean, but Star Trek seems to be in a rare atmosphere that. So anyway, over the years we talk about that, and the last few especially, I'd try to answer that like everyone else does, and when I'd get interviewed or be on a podcast or something, and C words kept coming to mind, and I noticed this, so I thought, oh, here's a cute little, we live in the world of the 10 crazy reasons why, click here, Number 4 will astound you. It's like, I think there's 5 reasons, but you have to have them all together, because a lot of things have almost all of these and haven't lived to be that long. So here's my 5 C's, good C words for Star Trek. So concept, okay. What did most people say? Well, Star Trek was a hopeful, optimistic view of the future where everyone was included. It was a very diverse, inviting milieu because it showed that Earth, we did not kill each other, we didn't poison the planet, we didn't blow ourselves up, we actually survived, found a way to get along with Mother Nature, and get along long enough to get off the planet, and then get along with most of who we found out there. Cardboard cutout villains of Klingons or whatever, nonetheless, notwithstanding. So the fact that it was a hopeful, optimistic concept, and when people get down about the daily headlines, that they can say, well, no, we can hang in here and make it. We can get there. We can get there. But then that's a great idea, but you've got to bring it to life if it's going to be, television or any kind of dramatic presentation. So the characters are great. And starting with Kirk and Spock and McCoy and Scotty on down, didn't always start off that way, but they evolved and became great. And then all the spin-offs, maybe not every single character, but all the shows have got hallmark characters that are great, that will speak on the human condition, or they just interact well, or they have interesting backgrounds, or they come from a premise, an intelligent human-like android, or a holographic doctor, or some aspect, a goo guy who can pull himself together and not. That's science fiction-y and cool, but still are great storytellers and story point of view people. But that's on paper, and if you're going to have it on film, you've got to have, and there they are, some of the original great characters that made Star Trek what it is. But behind every name on paper, obviously, character on paper is an actor. So you have to not just have that on paper, you've got to bring it to life. And the original series, the chemistry between those actors that Gene found is, Shatner and Nimoy, and DeForest Kelley was not even supposed to be, Spock was not supposed to be a lead, he was supposed to be second banana. And the force of Leonard Nimoy and the way that character evolved, but, now they became equals. Kirk and Spock were kind of the head of the ticket. And then DeForest Kelley was surely not supposed to be a lead, but getting Spock and McCoy on camera together was just amazing, Leonard and Dee Kelly, right? And by the end of the first year, they made the little show that had no money, coughed up money to make DeForest Kelley third billing, and he's above the line. He's in the opening credits for the last 2 seasons. Just because McCoy became, now we talk about the triad of Kirk is the, McCoy is the heart, and Spock is the logic, and Kirk is the action man that brings them both together, kind of thing. Just as a classic storytelling device. So that's awesome. But you know what? There's lots of entertainment properties and TVs and movies that have a great concept, characters, and casting. Of course, Star Trek had the morality plays, right? And not every episode, but in and out of all the series, but especially with the original series, the little theme, the little morality play that the episodes would be, and they would tackle some issue, whether it was race issues or economics or war and peace or computers are going to take our jobs, and whatever it might be, overpopulation, ecology, and the green movement. And that's true of a lot of great television. That's there. We can, if I see a Perry Mason or a MASH go by, I have to stop and watch it because it's just that way. But still, we don't have Perry Mason conventions. We don't have MASH. There might be one MASH convention somewhere once a year. I know there's a Twin Peaks convention somewhere once a year. Used to be a Northern Exposure get-together somewhere. And the thing that gets a lot of people maybe make the most fun about Star Trek, including me, but then I'm the biggest enjoyer of it also, is Star Trek's canon. The fact that it's a whole new created world, and the fact that all the creators respected their own world and they respected their audience enough to not screw their audience over. That door around this corridor, one day, if that is the door to the Deck 8 janitor's closet, you know what? 2 years later, that's still going to be the door to the Deck 8 janitor's closet. Now, I'm hyperbole here, but everything about Star Trek, and there were some flubs, there were some screw-ups, but 98% of the time they cared about having that kind of continuity going, because they said, if we're trying to tell stories here and make a statement that gets past the censors, which is why he's doing science fiction in the first place, if Gene Roddenberry couldn't do his series Lieutenant that was set in the legal system of the Marine Corps, and he couldn't tell a racial issue story that got censored and never shown, then maybe we can talk about some of these adult issues at the time. If I have purple people flying polka dot spaceships on pink and green planets, maybe we can sneak it past the censors and the audience was smart enough to know what we're talking about. Amen. And at the time, we can have cool spaceships and gadgets and tech too, and all that. So yeah. But to do that, if you're going to do that, you've got to have people still believe that these are people walking around on a starship that still get angry, they still cry, they still get scared, and that as they said, they don't stand and go, yes, I'm going to use my phaser now. It has 16 settings, and the first, he said Matt Dillon doesn't stop to talk about his 6-shooter. They just do it. They don't talk about how they groom their horses. On Gunsmoke, they just get on, or Bonanza, they just get on and go. And so that's the way they treated their background. They respected the audience and respected that. And I really think if you wonder why Star Trek has been around for 50 years, it did all of these things well, and it did them together. And there's very few other packages, very few entertainment shows that do that. And Star Wars was a movie hit, and they had movies, and they have a lot less background to go. And maybe Doctor Who, but it took them 20 or 30 years to be global until the reboot. And I'm talking science fiction here, but almost anything. There are classic genres that started as books, Sherlock Holmes or Tarzan, James Bond, things that have huge fan bases, but they started as a book, or Batman and Superman and the whole Marvel DC universe started as comic books. And all of those things get reboot a lot. But Star Trek started as these actors playing these characters in the 60s on a little budget, but they made you believe that they were real and told you great stories and made you feel good and had cool stuff about warp drive and things from the future, and so anyway, so we can get back to this, and enough of the serious stuff here, but I really think there's so much good classic, even TV programming out there from the golden age, but there's only one Star Trek. And maybe that's why. That's just my offer. I did have him earlier, but I just love this shot of Gene Roddenberry, again, who's the creator of Star Trek. This was in the fallow years when he wasn't making a ton of money in the 70s and 80s. The LA Times did a story. They just went to his house, his old house, and just went out in the backyard with the 3-foot Enterprise, put it up on that fence, and just shot that picture for their story. And it's just a great little thing. But you guys will remember this. I love this. We're here in a library again. There was a time, not everything is on here, the James Blish novelizations of the episodes were from Bantam. A couple other things were from Bantam, but Ballantine had the animateds novelized and had all the cool behind the scenes and nonfiction Star Trek book. But there was a time when you could put everything written down about Star Trek almost on one flyer. So I came across this. This was actually in the, I think this came in, is the medical reference out? Tech manual is, the concordance is that. This must have been in the concordance. When the concordance came out, Beecher Trimble's Encyclopedia Concordance came out. This was an extra, about 76 or so, 1976. And I found this the other day going through some archives, and I thought, wow, you could put all of Star Trek on one piece of paper back then. That's awesome. That was that world. But here you go, guys, just to catch us all up, and since so many of us go back so far, we live in a world where the Enterprise has been in the Rose Parade. Okay? We live in a world where things have changed. We don't have to quite live in the closet with our fandom anymore. We live in a world where our president is a Trekkie. Okay? And not just our president, we live in a world where world leaders are Trekkies. Like King Mohammed here I'm sorry. His dad, Abdullah, thank you. King Abdullah of Jordan, when he was the crown prince, before his dad passed away, was an extra on Voyager a couple of times. The Dalai Lama is a Trek fan. There are millions of celebrity Trek fans. Some of them are in huge international positions of authority or prestige. I like to call this picture, "Where's Data?" But the whole entourage came up. This is like early in Next Generation, the 80s. We live in a world where, if you've been paying attention or you were at the post office recently, there are Star Trek stamps for the 50th anniversary, which is very cool. But if you guys might remember this, that's not even new anymore, really. In late 90s, they did these decade by decade specials, and Star Trek stamp from 1999, from the 60s decade. And actually there was a guy, his name was Bill Kraft from Minnesota, who had been trying since the 70s with petitions to the National Stamp Selection Committee, whatever it is. He had been trying since the 70s with petitions to get a Star Trek stamp. And in the 70s and the 80s it wasn't going to happen. But finally by the 90s, things changed, pop culture changed, and good on him, to the point now where, sure, yeah, we'll do a deal. 50th anniversary, yes, we'll do things. We live in a world where, if you were paying attention, the original Enterprise, the real Enterprise, has been in the Smithsonian since the 70s and has been displayed different ways. And in 1991, it got I'll just say it, a not great restoration outer surfacing done, and it was put down in the gift shop because the political winds of museums blow just like they do everywhere else. And the original idea was that Star Trek had inspired so many real pilots and engineers and scientists that it was one of those flights of fancy that even if it didn't actually flew, it flew the imaginations of those who got us there later. And by the 90s, that had been lost as it's down by the gift shop in the basement where it was for about 20 years. And as we came into the 50th, ooh, my laser pointer. I can use a laser pointer. A woman here who works at the National Air and Space Museum, Margaret Heidekamp here, got with CBS, my friend John Van Sitter's here in licensing, and Mike and Denise Okuda, who are famous, who are graphic gods all on the shows. Bill George here, who worked at ILM. Rick Sternbach, who helped design the new movie Enterprise, who designed Voyager, worked on Next Generation. Andy Probert here, who helped design the A and a lot of the motion picture era hardware. And Adam Schneider, who is just a fan with enough of a bankroll to get things moving. And they got this team together and put a new, got the surface back, did so much scientific investigation. They were like dealing with Egyptian hieroglyphics and mummy artifacts, and did archaeological digs on the paint and x-rays and scans of the structure and found where it had cracked and all this stuff, and did this wonderful renovation. And it's now restored, and in the, you walk in the front door of National Air and Space, and it's right there in front, back where it should be, as an as a fictional but still inspiring model of flight through the galaxy, and most literal and imaginative, emotion inspiring. And that was one of the gifts of the 50th anniversary this year. And I say the real Enterprise, how is that sometimes even more real? Did you see this in the news a couple years ago? A guy in China, where we think of them as ripping us off all the time, but a Star Trek fan who was Chinese wanted to build one of his buildings for his employees at his company in the shape of an Enterprise. And he not only did it, he applied to CBS for a license and paid for it to have his architect do this. So, I mean, like, here's his, maybe he's a fan of I.M. Pei, or I don't know. But here's his like soccer recreation field for his employees. This is just an office building. And if you Google map it and look at from this, you know. Now, I was going to say, my fanboy voice might say it looks more like Voyager, Larry, than it does in Enterprise. But the point's made. The point's made. It's awesome. That's in China. We live in a world where now, as of September 2012, all of the original cast have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which sounds, well, yeah, of course they. It was a long time coming, and actually the longtime president of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce thought that was not right. And it wasn't until he had passed, and a couple of years went by, and Walter Koenig's fan group, who had long had all the money and the paperwork and the bureaucracy in hand, but that finally came to pass. And most of the surviving cast was there to be, and of course this was in 2012, so Leonard Nimoy there was still with us. But yeah, we live in that world. It was such a cool event that by then they had a mini convention around this. And one of the events there in Hollywood was we did a star-to-star tour of where the stars are. And you can actually get to them within about 6 blocks. They're kind of in clumps. There's 2 main clumps. It's very easy to do. But they had me come in to lead a tour around with Walter and some fans that had paid to be there. And we live in a world, again, where by the next day, this was on the internet. Can you read that? Can you say that? This is, Larry, are you sure this is the way to the nuclear vessels? Of course, we live in a world where everything's on the internet anyway, so. Yeah. So just throwing that in. We live in a world where in Burbank there's an apartment building for retired artists. It's called the Burbank Senior Artist Village. And every year they have an art show, sculpture and art pieces and all that. And one year, I used to be in a club that had its meetings there. So I was in there once a month, and I walked in one time and they were having their show. And I saw this, lots of artwork, and I saw this piece that was this modern, obviously modern, globby art, kind of modern art piece. And I happened to take a glance at the little title card, And the name of this piece is Mr. Spock's Blood. It's an acrylic by Lauren Corwin, 2011. Self-taught. But anyway, I just thought that was awesome. I just love that somebody in their late 60s or 70s or whatever had done a Mr. Spock's Blood painting. But shows where we are. But we live in a world where Leonard Nimoy has passed away. Of course, he's not the first. My friend, my good guy, Dee Kelly, Jimmy Doohan, who's Scotty, Majel Barrett passed away in 2008. Gene, of course, died in 1991. Kind of he was a hard-driving Hollywood guy. And then after Leonard passed, people started kind of realizing how much of the original crew we had lost, the original cast, not to mention the original creators. So this was a really popular internet meme for a while there. Some people added Grace Lee Whitney here, who played Yeoman Rand the first half season. This was another one that I saw a lot, where they got Grace Lee in over here, and then Leonard and Gene and Majel and Jimmy and Dee there. And that's coming up more and more, not in little niche galleys of fans, but I remember when Leonard died, I saw somebody online say, well, I wonder if the mainstream media will cover this. And I wrote back, I said, we are the mainstream media, guys. It's like the geeks won. The Big Bang Theory is the #1 show on TV, the #1 comedy on TV. And of course, you can't watch Big Bang without knowing all your sci-fi and geek culture references, and Star Trek is a big part of that. And they've had Star Trek references and guest stars, and had Leonard on as a voice for the action figure, and had Sheldon had a whole episode of this. And Leonard couldn't physically come over and be in the show, so they wrote a show that he could just do voicing for, and it was still awesome. But that's the world we live in. But even that's not new. You guys will remember this. If you go back to like early Carol Burnett, back when Star Trek was first on, and the joke was Benjamin Spock, the baby doctor, had just hit the consciousness, right? And there were all those Mr. Spock, Dr. Spock jokes and confusion. People are still confused this day. And they wrote a sketch for Carol Burnett where she's got a baby, she's the mother of the baby, and they do something, they make a play on the Dr. Spock, Mr. Spock punchline. But even then, you have to stop and think, this is Leonard, would never do this later on. This was when the Star Trek was on the air. You can tell, he came over at the end of a day's shooting. He came from Desilu in Hollywood and drove over to Television City on Fairfax, CBS, and shot this. And its first season, anybody in the room know how I know it's first season? What? The collar is a little high. Here's what I think I go by. The stripes, his rank braid are close, because after that they moved him to the captain's side. But you're right, that is the early first season. The other thing that's amazing is, and this shows you what a fan Carol Burnett was, to have this much clout, even earlier in her show, she was CBS and Star Trek was NBC. And, Carson would always say, appearing on another network, and they would all wink at each other because it was stupid. They made them not, give a break to another network. That was when there were 3. Now there's 500 and they can't hold it back. But anyway, that's just an awesome picture to show you celebrities and the power of Star Trek, even in the beginning. So I just threw this in. If any of you did see DS9, talk about the allegiance that Star Trek feels to pop culture, and what a good sense of humor everything about Star Trek has in it. So this was the Promenade directory on DS9, which was at the station, that you only saw pieces of it, mainly the Quark's bar and the infirmary and the security office. So you're way ahead of me, right? So you do see, here's Quark's bar, right? And here's the infirmary, Dr. Bashir. But if you start, looking around, you see things like the Bonsai Institute here, and there's some, oh, you got me, where are we? Spacely Sprockets, Jetson, and here's Millie Ways for all you Hitchhiker's Guide people. Jupiter Incorporation. Yes. Yep. Jupiter Mining. Here's Forbin Project. Don't go in there. If you're a Man from U.N.C.L.E. fan, you might even catch Del Floria's Tailor Shop, which was the name on the fake store that the U.N.C.L.E. agents would walk through to go into the Yeah,
They
yeah.
type out it.
Yeah, there's a little, yeah. And then there's in-jokes for the crew, like Shay Zimmerman here for Herman Zimmerman, and Berman's the lithium supply because Rick Berman makes the show go. Yeah.
Systems.
Yo-Yo-Dyne is a second ball, yeah. Tom Servo's used robots there if you're I started to say MST3K, yeah, Mystery Science Theater 3000. I was trying to say the whole name. So a lot of fun. What's the other one here? Oh, and if you're a big NASA Right Stuff Original Mercury 7 fan, Poncho's Happy Bottom Riding Club from the Right Stuff, yeah. Anyway, a lot of fun there. If you ever get a chance to look at anything graphics of, especially modern Star Trek close up, there's a lot embedded there.
Our personal favorite is when they had plans for a starbase, and hidden in amongst them was the Kay and Yuri Intensive Medical Care Facility.
A lot of anime, especially in Next Generation. Yeah, a lot of things. So, 1976, we were talking about the fans trying to petition for a stamp. Well, that took 30 years. What happened faster was, because politics was involved, it was an election year, and the first space shuttle was rolling out in '76, and they had a naming contest. It was going to be called the Constitution. But Star Trek fans kind of took over the balloting and got it named Enterprise. And of course, now later on, people say, well, if they'd known that it was the first, it was not going to fly, why didn't you save it for the shuttle that actually flew? But it was still a big deal. When they rolled out the first shuttle, and people were so hungry to get back into space, even if we weren't going to the moon or Mars yet, but having the space truck, oh, we're going to make space pay, and it's going to be reusable, and that's cool. And it was, but the entire cast, save one, William Shatner, everybody in NASA had a big deal, rolled it out, the Star Trek theme played as they towed it around the corner, and it was a huge, huge day back then. And this picture and some other pictures of everybody sitting in chairs was very awesome. And then when Leonard passed away last year, when NASA got on their, this is NASA's official Twitter, when they tweeted about RIP Leonard Nimoy, it kind of encapsulates, again, the Star Trek and NASA had this special mutual love affair back and forth. Anytime an astronaut met a show actor or creator, it was kind of like, no, we love you more. No, we love you more. No, we love you more. You inspired us, but you inspired us. No, but you inspired us, but you inspired us. And that's really encapsulated there by that NASA tweet from the day, and it still goes on. And this is an astronaut named Christopher Ferretta from Italy. When the weekend that Leonard passed away, she was in orbit, and she passed on her RIP. She later on wore her Janeway, Captain Janeway outfit on, yeah. Then you'll see ground-based. So my friend Christian Bobak here got really famous for his haircut during some of the Mars rover missions. And this is a great shot that popped up of like, well, forget Christian, look at the guy back here in the, yeah. So this is from just a few years ago. But forget that, once again, go back to the 60s. This is landing Mariner 6 on Mars, the first soft landing of a NASA craft, or anything from Earth, Russian or American, on Mars for the first time. This was in 1967, so Star Trek had been on for 1 year again. And the NASA guys are already having a lot of fun taking a little inspiration there. And the supervisor is not yelling at him, so it's all good. It's all good. And then even in the modern era, our first female astronaut, American astronaut, Sally Ride. When Voyager started, which the big headliner there when the pilot came out was that it was the first Star Trek, as a cultural icon, it was the first Star Trek to be headlined by a woman captain, right? DS9 had the first person of color, Avery Brooks, now a woman. And when they had this is from the cast and crew screening. This is Mike, Rick Berman and Michael Piller and Jerry Taylor are back here, the co-creators. But Kate came out, and as they were about to present the first time the crew had seen the pilot put together, the first episode, they had Sally Ride invited as a guest because of the symbolism and kind of the cultural impact of the night. And then they surprised her. On top of the invitation being there, they surprised her. Kate presented her with a little Voyager comm badge in a frame and said, we want to make you an honorary member of the Voyager crew, and here's your comm badge. Feel free to call in anytime. What's amazing is the same time that they brought the Enterprise model out and refurbished it and unveiled it at the National Air and Space Museum, and they had a big grand reopening of the museum itself with some other new things redone. They just redid the Spirit of St. Louis also, refurbished. They have a temporary exhibit of Sally Ride's personal effects, which is kind of cool. And one of the things that there's 20 or 30 pieces in a little exhibit, and one of the pieces is the comm badge she received that night from Star Trek. Apparently, after that night, she had it like in the front of her desk drawer, which means it was always very special to her. And so when her family put this exhibit and gave some pieces to the Smithsonian to put out, our first American female astronaut, there's her little Voyager Star Trek comm badge in the middle of her other effects from her life, which is kind of cool. But then, you know, we've had real astronauts actually be on the show. Mae Jemison, who was among the astronauts that Nichelle Nichols over here recruited, women and minorities in the 70s to kind of diversify the astronaut corps. And sadly, half of the crew of Challenger, when it was lost in '86 after launch, were astronauts that she had recruited. Ellison Onizuka and Judy Resnick, and one more, Ron McNair. But Mae Jemison had at least 2 shuttle flights, and she got to be a transporter chief on a Next Generation episode. Second chances, if you want to go find it. So, talking about the interaction of Star Trek in real life and history, you might say, yeah, when the JJ movies came out in '09, Newsweek felt things were back, that Star Trek was back mainstream enough that they devoted it to a cover and a cover story, and the inspiring aspects of Star Trek in the culture, science and just mainstream both. But even this wasn't the first time. I mean, again, let's go back to 1986, that 20th anniversary year, when Star Trek, I think, really went mainstream for the first time. And the world, the suits, and the bean counters, and everybody realized that, oh my God, this is not just the kids anymore. With the global impact that the new movie had and the announcement of a new Star Trek coming, this thing isn't going away. It's affecting people somehow, some way. It's affecting a lot of people in a lot of different ways, inspiring and affecting and bringing people together. And it's not going away. And at the same time, it's making Paramount an awful lot of money. So, you know, the accountants are even happy too. And, you know, they didn't pick Shatner, they didn't pick the crew, they didn't pick a ship shot. They picked this iconic portrait of Spock to represent Star Trek on the cover of Newsweek. Of course, this was before there was no bloody A, B, C, or D at the time, as Scotty would say later. There was just the original crew at the time, but still. Yeah, what am I doing that for a pointer? Oh, and here's the part where this gives out on me, and I have to tease you all and apologize a little bit and change our shoot. For some reason, my iPhoto just gives out and won't go beyond this anymore. So I'm going to do the story so far. Here's where this is the review for the quiz. There we go. So we've got the modern movies, which have brought a ton of new fans in. A lot of people love to debate what they are, if they're as effective, what kind of modern age we live in. But you can't argue that they brought in a ton of new fans. They've made it mainstream palatable. Suddenly, Star Trek is not this goofy thing or this creaky old thing that's losing out to Star Wars or all the Marvel DC movies. That Star Trek is cool again. I mean, the Onion graphic was goofy, but it's pretty true. Best of all, no one's worrying about the younger demographic anymore. This is actually from, huh? Yeah, that was part of the joke.
Really young Jean-Luc Picard.
Yes, you didn't see the episode where Picard was shrunk back to being a baby, and not that far back. 15 maybe, but not that far back. No, this was actually when Gates McFadden had her baby. When Dr. Crusher was wearing the maternity gown that we didn't say what it was. About 5th season of Next Generation, and her baby was born. This was her Christmas card that year. But there's so much worry about, is Star Trek going to like get younger? Are we going to bring the Comic-Con generation in? And I think it's going to happen. The other new headline we didn't know about until just a few months ago, but a year ago now almost, was there is a new. Is this news to anybody here? Did anyone not know there's a new Star Trek series coming? Yay! Okay.
Star Trek's caught an STD.
There is a new, huh?
Star Trek's caught an STD. Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't do that with any other show. I know. I thought the same thing, and I went, okay, doesn't have to be that way. No, there is a new Star Trek series coming in January. But again, I do this. Here's the Huffington Post. It's online. I got as far as I could to cut this. I mean, you know, here's the day's news. They didn't have a name. They didn't have a format yet. They just said we're having a new series. It's going to lead off our new all-access streaming thing. But here's Huffington Post, and bang. So don't tell me that Star Trek isn't having an effect in the culture, and the culture doesn't care. So no details, but we do know this is happening. That's about all they could say. And that's the whole story, huh? Yeah, it says Star Trek is returning to TV. Obviously not this Star Trek, because this is from the 60s, but we don't have any pictures, but we'll put this up and everybody will still get excited. So here is the name. The last few months, the details have been coming out, called Star Trek Discovery. It is going to be on CBS All Access, which is a little bit of a controversy to some people because they have to pay, like Netflix or Hulu or whatever. The first episode will be on regular broadcast CBS, and then the rest will be a 13-episode season. If you go back to the 70s, they are taking some of the visual cues from, this is Ralph McQuarrie before he did Star Wars. There was a movie project called Star Trek Planet of the Titans, and he did some conceptual work for it. And some of the new people working on the show kind of wanted to be inspired by that for the lead ship. And we're not really dark enough in here to see this, but they did a teaser at Comic-Con San Diego, and it was very much a work in progress, and they tried to warn people that it was, but it's that big triangular chunky secondary hull down here is kind of we're trying so hard. There. Okay, just stay there for a minute. We'll go back to it. Anyway, yeah, it's kind of like the translucent fish at the bottom of the ocean. So there we go. Thanks. This guy, Brian Fuller, is the one who's show running the show. If you saw Hannibal, he's done some quirky series the last 10, 15 years of his career. Some great shows. And Pushing Daisies, it's on ABC, a really kind of quirky show. Wonder Falls and Dead Like Me before that. I first knew him when he was a little baby junior rookie working on the 4th season of Voyager. He was all young like that, and interviewed him a few times back in the day. The show is also going to have Rod Roddenberry, the first time that the family has been involved since Gene died, because they don't have a financial stake in the show. They get a percentage of the profit, but they're not really creatively involved. And they reached out to have Rod be involved, which is awesome. He and his business partner, Trevor Roth. Yes, I can't believe it either. That's Rod and I at a Predator. I don't know, Patrick doesn't think it'll last long, but I think it will. And here's the thing to remember, because it's on streaming, it won't have to worry about the ratings. I know. Now don't sick the Humane Society or PETA on me or anything. This was when Enterprise was having ratings problems, and they knew they were not long for the world. One of the crew, in fact, the director of photography, did this T-shirt design up for the crew because they were kind of in grim spirits, right? So, I know. But the good news is that the new Star Trek won't have to worry about ratings. It'll be like Game of Thrones and The Sopranos, everything else that's been on HBO or the streaming service, Orange is the New Black, any of those shows, because it's all it'll be subscriber-based. So no one will nervously be watching the Nielsen's every week. No Nielsen nervous Nellies.
The gun was on stun anyhow.
Yeah. There you go, retcon thinking. There you go. So another person's been announced. If you might recognize this young man here from the Wrath of Khan filming, Nick Meyer, who was the director-writer who might be one of the 4 or 5 people who have saved Star Trek over the years. This is Nick last year, right after Harv Bennett's memorial on the lot at Paramount. Another guy, Joe Menosky, who worked on Next Generation and Voyager, and worked with Brian some on Voyager. He's a veteran. I should take it back to Joe. Joe's also responsible. I don't know does anyone know about the Legend of the 47? On either with Star Trek or okay, there's a college outside California, outside LA, Pomona College, where they, because of a joke with a math statistics professor one day at a summer school class, became a campus legend, the legend of the 47, because I don't know if you all know this or not, but 47 is the most common random number in the universe.
Close to 42. Okay.
How can it be the most common random number? Yeah. But that was the joke. Yes, and 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. But as Rick Berman once said here just the last few years, 47 is 42 adjusted for inflation. Joe is the one that brought the 47 from, he went to Pomona College, he brought the 47 legend to Star Trek, and so from the middle of Next Generation on, there are 47s all through Star Trek scripts and Star Trek graphics, and Captain, the planet is ringed with 47 unmanned sentry drones, and Captain, and 147, and then there's occasionally a 174 or a 74. It's even in the new movies. If you see the new Star Trek 09 movie with the new reboot cast, when Chris Pine's Kirk runs up on his cycle and is going to join the crew, he's going to join Starfleet, and he throws his keys to that security guard for the cycle. He's parked right in front of a sign that says Riverside Shipyard Sector 47. So, just so you know. So when I started my new fan service business, I had to call it Portal 47 too, just to keep that going, because I didn't want to be so on the nose with fans. So anyway. But Joe Menosky's there. He's a veteran writer from the show. Nick Meyer, Brian Fuller, who's the showrunner. This is the kind of cool thing that I've stuck back in my archives. So during Next Generation, when Michael Piller opened up the pitching process, usually in Hollywood, it's just writers with an agent, right, who get to do spec scripts, like sample scripts, buy this, or just come in and pitch ideas. See if you like my ideas before I spend a lot of time trying to write a script that you're not going to pay me for if you don't like it. But if you tell me up front you want to buy it and pay me, then I'll write a script. Michael Piller opened that up so that fans and that would-be writers who don't have an agent yet could come in and pitch, which was awesome. And they bought a lot of things from people. Some of it, the names stuck. Sometimes they would get rewritten so much that they would still pay somebody for the idea, but they wouldn't have a credit. But the bottom line was their doors of the Hart Building were open. They had people from Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and the first year or so of Enterprise, even after Michael wasn't involved with the shows anymore. But that led to a lot of hassle. The whole reason that Hollywood doesn't do that is because there's legal issues. Well, now that people sign a release form. But still, it can be interesting, because one of the assistants did this toward the end of Next Generation. Because, if the easy thing is you come in with a great idea that works and fits. And if you hit the bullseye, they say, I love it, right? If you barely miss, if it was so close, they say, oh, we just did that show, or, oh, at the time they would say, oh, that's more of a DS9 story, or, oh, it's similar to something we did in the second season. Okay, but you were close, you were in the ballpark, right? If you were a little further away, the storyline is too linear. It weakens the character. There's nothing for the rest of the Enterprise to do. That's nice. If they're a little more under their breath, it might be, do you really watch the show? At least don't steal from us. No, let me guess, space pirates? Yeah, and if you're way off the mark and you totally wasted your time in theirs, you might get a, that's ridiculous, or get out, or hello, security, or that's the stupidest goddamn thing I ever heard. Anyway, that was internal. That was on bulletin boards at the end of Next Generation's years for a while, kind of a little ingrate joke. Anybody read the Star Trek novels? Anybody? Okay, do you read the Voyager novels? Okay, so Kirsten Beyer's name would be familiar to you. Kirsten Beyer, Brian has brought in to write for the show, which is unheard of, a novelist. So one of the really well-known, well-liked novelists on the show is going to be writing the new series. Both for her story writing, and also she would pull things from non-Voyager bits of Star Trek in to use as background when they fit her story writing. So I think Brian appreciated her for that. So that's a look at the new show. But one thing that the new movie and the new show both are going to be inheriting is Star Trek's affinity for doing good things. We're looking at the Library Association PSAs, the photo shoots they did. Gene and Majel have always been big backers of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. They were both on the board of the National Space Society in their different times. And officially and unofficially, especially the movies, because they can do that because they're just one-off projects. The new movies, the Bad Robot movies from J.J. Abrams, this is the Beyond cast, and they had a huge promotional effort to benefit several, probably people in the production office and some of the cast's favorite charities this year, and had a lot of, when they were first starting to film about a year and a half ago, a lot of promotion attention to back some of their, with Make-A-Wish here still involved. That's kind of been a tradition. But you know, Star Trek's always been on the cutting edge, right? Leonard and his porn stash there. Yeah. The Magnavision video disc player. Yay! Yeah, Star Trek's always been on the cutting edge. So I mentioned it earlier. If you want to come over here in a minute and talk after we do question and answers, I'm very proud to speak for this nonprofit team that's doing this 100 or more student experiments from around the world. Named Enterprise in Space, the NSS Enterprise in Space from the National Space Society, and that's for 5 years down the road. It's going to be corporate and grassroots supported, and is an awesome project. So come ask me about that. But otherwise, yeah, this has been my life. And back in the early days when I was interviewing Old Blue down here, my tape recorder, Ron D. Moore, who later did Battlestar Galactica and now Outlander in his mullet years with his Velvet Elvis. His Velvet Elvis. Denny Herter putting the landing legs on Voyager. There's a cool shot, yeah. Marina getting into makeup here. The actual painting that they used for the capital of Romulus there, Sid Dutton, the matte artist. Yes, that's why they look so good in Starfleet bras. Yep. Yep. If you wanted to get into your Orion body, it actually looked like a body shop when you went in to get your Orion body. And if you watched Enterprise and enjoyed Porthos, this is actually Breezy, the female dog, and we did a story, an article with her and took pictures, and later on her trainer sent me an actual photograph of Breezy. What would you call it, right? Yeah. Anyway, awesome. So that's been my life. This is the last time the original crew were all together. In 1996, there was an official 30th anniversary convention in Huntsville, Alabama. There's, you know, Jimmy and Walter and Dee Kelly and Leonard Nimoy and Shatner and George Takei and Nichelle Nichols. And there's some astronauts back up here behind him you can't see in the dark, which I always thought that was odd, that some of the actual real-life Mercury and Gemini and Apollo astronauts were all there at the same time. This was the last time they were all together in public in an event. Dee had or was soon to get stomach cancer and died June of '99. So 3 years later, he was not with us. And then, you know, we've lost them some more since. But this was such a cool picture. This is actually a few years before that, 17 years earlier, when most of the cast were together at an event in Houston, Texas, the first big rock show arena event that Star Trek ever tried to do. It's called The Ultimate Fantasy because they were all together singing and doing a play and doing a variety show, basically with a talk show component, in an arena in Houston. And it was sold out for 3 shows, except if you look in the back here, you can see an awful lot of empty seats back in there. It's because The Ultimate Fantasy did not quite turn out the way it was supposed to turn out. And that's why, by the end of the weekend, fans were calling it the Con of Wrath because so much stuff blew up and fell apart and melted down, although they all got everything they were promised, which is amazing. And that's why I started working on, I mentioned my documentary, The Con of Wrath, and recapturing this. And so far, among the actors, George is in it. Laura Banks, who was one of Khan's babes with a line at his helm of his people. There's what we signed that weekend, yeah. And oops, that was in there. And Nichelle Nichols and Walter Koenig and Harv Bennett, who passed away the same weekend Leonard did, are all in it. So here, after we do some Q&A here and some questions, if you want to come over and ask me about my documentary, we do that. I have some information cards to hand out for that and Portal 47 and just my Trekland projects in general. And I've got some copies of Stellar Cartography over there, if anybody wants one. And some information.